What school won't tell you? Lesson 8, Ethics and Morals. Hi guys, I'm sure you've noticed that in recent times, especially since the pandemic, people have been going more and more berserk, becoming increasingly irritable, freaking out over trivial matters, and starting fights that can turn deadly in the worst cases. But what causes this unprecedented loss of self-control? Is it the increasingly difficult living conditions, such as the global rise in the price of all goods? Or are there much more fundamental problems that not only favor the downfall of our society, but actually hasten it? This is the question we want to explore in this video. The reason for a degenerating society can be found in the loss or decline of all ethical and moral values. Ethics and morals are undoubtedly connected and are often equated. But there is a crucial difference, because the respective norms and values of morals are considered to be a single group, whereas ethics rather describes what is right or wrong, which can be explained with a different and scientific description as a general discussion of right and wrong. Everywhere there are opportunities to behave consciously, according to ethics and morals, to behave politely, honestly, tolerantly, and considerately, thus in daily life as well as throughout life in general. An ethical moral behavior in the naturally given form can be practiced in all situations of existence, thus in all private areas, in every society, at work, with friends and acquaintances, as well as in the family, with everyone's dealings, and also in road traffic, and so forth. Ethics and morals are also practical instructions for the life conduct, for conditions and rules that are of value in this respect, as well as for correct actions and doings, which human beings have to concern themselves with again and again. In particular with that, always in the foreground, are ethics and morals in their worthy traditional forms, which are listed as special values, namely the protection of life, free will, right action, and the maintenance of freedom. With regard to the human species, ethics and morals are primarily concerned with the naturally given basic principle of behavior towards one's fellow human beings, but also, which is not usually said by the science of psychology, because it apparently does not even know this, towards planet Earth, towards nature and its fauna and flora. However, the ethical moral values also refer to questions of sexuality, just as they are not, and never limited to, very many other things, but are extremely important, such as with regard to logic, the intellect, rationality, and responsibility. These have always applied in particular and in every case, and must apply for all future. The thoughts and feelings alone, which can lead, for example, from an ethical moral gratification to an indignation, pity, or guilt, up to strange emotions, are to be divided into values which the human being normally never becomes conscious of. Ethics and morals are fundamentally concerned with human actions of good and evil, as well as of right and wrong, and indeed in particular of the behavior. These values developed naturally already many hundreds of millions of years ago, and in the course of evolution have been naturally stored as penchants in all life forms, and thus also in the fundamental values in human beings. This is the case, while otherwise the majority of all values, however, must be acquired by human beings themselves through education and self-education and so forth. Ethics and morals do not only mean that one should not kill, but they also say that wars should not be waged and that death sentences should not be imposed, but also that the human being should not quarrel, should not hate, and should not use Gewalt, and so forth. However, ethics and morals also say that the human being should be self-conscious, self-confident, dutiful, and honest, and so forth. It is claimed that ethical moral views regarding drugs and sex and so forth are hereditary by about 50%. while the remaining 50% of the deviation is explained by the unique social environment. However, it cannot be seen like this in accordance with natural ethics and morals, which are, in fact, in a nature-based form, completely directed towards ensuring the living together of each species and kind, depending on their own kind. This naturalness of the ethical moral values, however, comprises only the smallest part, because the great entirety of ethics and morals is to be worked out by human beings themselves. However, with regard to all values of the entire ethics and morals, these are to be determined individually by each personality, whether they are worked out or not. Explicitly, with regard to views and assumptions, these are indeed neither for anything, nor are they directly or indirectly hereditary, because these values must rightly be learned consciously and willingly, and also be implemented. Children already unconsciously learn the naturally given part of ethics and morals when they are still very small, because, as a rule, they are already indoctrinated with it after birth, namely without this being perceived by the parents, and thus not realized. The whole thing happens in such a wise that the newborns are quite naturally looked after and cared for by the natural, ethical, moral coddling of the mother and the father. This is just as the first living creatures did hundreds of millions of years ago as a natural form, thus enabling the living together of the families and the herds of the life forms, and as it happens unconsciously today through the human being. A part of the human beings, however, as a result of their personalities and the might of their consciousnesses used by them, is able to take ethical, moral decisions with conscious thoughts and feelings arising therefrom. This happens while the much larger part of the human beings, without being conscious of it, cultivates pseudo-thoughts and has fallen prey to a belief delusion addiction. Consequently, they are living in belief and frown upon reality and its truth and punish it with their belief. A sign that the belief, be it religious or worldly, is deeply embedded in the character of human beings and that they are not capable of perceiving reality as it really is. These human beings have a false, fine spiritual perception out of their belief. Consequently, they also cannot distinguish reality and its truth, as well as the unreal and the untrue as right or wrong. The inevitable consequence of this is that, as a result of their belief delusion addiction, they deem it to be right. However, reality to be wrong, and vehemently defend their belief. They are therefore neither capable of recognizing the negative nor the positive, nor do they know or understand that the true, the good, and the right does not come and grow by itself, but that it must first be planted and fostered before it can be harvested and directed towards the right lines of logic and intellect. Therefore, human beings who have fallen prey to a belief delusion addiction must first find a seed that germinates in them, grows forth, and allows them to take right ethical moral decisions that are far from belief, however truthfully and worthy. Human beings who are effectively self-thinking and therefore not believers, whose duty it is to create their own thoughts and to direct right and valueful feelings, consequently they therewith also build up a healthy and positive psyche condition, are truly ones who lead their lives in a worthy wise and are able to master their existence at any time. The creation energy, together with the personality and the consciousness, is the most important factor in that the creationally given energy and power gives life to the human being, namely in such a wise that it animates the personality and thus also the consciousness. It is also through this energy and power that human beings are able to create thoughts and feelings by means of their consciousnesses, through which they can not only mold, form, and use their daily lives, but also learn and acquire knowledge, through which they in turn evolve, that is to say, develop and become more knowing, more understanding, more knowledgeable, more capable, and more lettered, and so forth. This creates an ongoing, evolutive impression and an understanding of reality and its truth. which fundamentally uplifts the consciousness, its thoughts and the feelings, as well as forms the state of the psyche to a high value, and therethrough creates morals of ethical norms, and thus of fundamentals of moral values that regulate general interhuman behaviour, which is normally recognized and accepted as binding by many human beings, as well as being perceived in a fine spiritual wise as the individual's moral fine spiritual perception. Fundamentally, it is to be understood that all activity of the consciousness is always a product of the creation energy and offers the human being the possibility to keep life functioning and to evolve knowingly through its energy and power. Everything conceivably possible in both positive and negative form of the thoughts and feelings is based solely on the fact that the creation energy alone offers everything in terms of energy and power, that human beings are able to also bring about feeling impulsations by means of thinking. However, how they form their thoughts and feelings in a positive or negative wise, and whether they are connected to reality and its truth, or to unreality and thus to untruth, is something they decide for themselves. If they decide to think realistically by themselves and to bring forth and logically follow real positive feelings from this, then they are human beings who see reality as it actually is. Consequently, they continuously strive to assess, decide, and act according to reality and its truth. If, however, human beings are undecisive, careless, slovenly, and lacking in energy in the sense of unconcernedness, or if they are too young to perceive, comprehend, and logically follow reality and its truth, then they begin very early, as a rule through indoctrination in the form of upbringing and hearsay, as well as copying from acquaintances and the environment and so forth, to shield themselves from reality. As a result, they turn to what they simply want to believe and accept as truth, thus simply trusting and, without thinking, relying on all that is said. Anything opposite that is based on reality and its truth is inconsiderately rejected and deemed to be a lie and deception. However, in return, the realization of an expectation is hoped for, which, however, remains unfulfillable at all times. Every religious belief leads to a dependence, almost a pathological craving, with almost no hope of rescue, as a result of which human beings befallen by it feel a strong desire to embed their addictive beliefs and their addictive behavior ever more deeply in themselves, wherethrough they, in this respect, lose control over their independent thinking to such an extent that they believe in any situation that the God in whom they believe will surely direct everything in accordance with the rightness. This negative consequence of their belief addiction does not let them forego it anymore. Consequently, there are never any withdrawal symptoms, just as no doubts or considerations regarding the addictions occur when they are confronted with it. However, if this does happen, then withdrawal symptoms immediately appear, which, as a rule, lead to the immediate breaking off of acquaintances and friendships and so forth with those human beings who dared to, questioningly or explanatorily, raise their voices with regard to the belief addiction. This, as a rule, is the reason why duties are simply neglected by the believers and, as already mentioned, acquaintances, friendships, or close relationships are simply brought to an end without a whimper. In a child, belief occurs sneakily through several stages in continuous motion that result from the development of increasing age, in which case the addictive substance of belief is used more and more to avoid problems, in which case the control over one's own responsibility with regard to ethics and morals is also lost, and what has been lost is replaced more and more by bad habits. Thereby, the pathological craving for belief only turns to such an extent that a hidden or open hatred arises against all fellow human beings who are not of exactly the same belief or are without it. The belief addiction is not based on any genetic predisposition, but solely and exclusively on indoctrinating influences and the inconsiderate belief-based copying of the same by the human being in question. In a religiously believing family, a child at a very young age already finds itself in a difficult, religiously believing starting position, which constitutes a risk factor for the child to be able to develop its thought world autonomously without being harmed, because the religious belief that is shown to it by the family members has a dangerously indoctrinating effect, which the child cannot make a stand against, or can do so only with great difficulty. Depending on family conflicts, stress and gewalt, and even misuse in childhood or in the time of youth, a religious belief comes about that does not allow any viable ethical moral self-development. Rather, it all the more destroys any personal ethical moral impulse control and the sense of social development from the ground up. This also damages the capacities for the upbuilding of all important protective factors with regard to health, as a result of which the growing up human being inevitably has to make do with inadequate use of immune-based powers of resistance in his or her later adulthood. The socially inadequate norms of ethics and morals, which, as such, are obviously unknown to the science of psychology in their entire scope, but as a whole form the ample values of that by which the human being becomes a true human being when he or she learns, masters, and uses them in daily life, are the great terrible thing of the fact that the human being as a thinking Wesen thinks, decides, and acts against that which is right, neutral, and life-affirming. As a result, everything is laid out for fighting, for malicious punishment, for murder and manslaughter, in which case the human being thinks, sees, assumes, and advocates this as good and fair. This also occurs in jurisdiction, and indeed simply because the death penalty is applied, as well as covert or overt torture, iniquitous insults and persecution, and unfair sentences. There is also the factor of the execution of a sentence, which frequently goes hand in hand with torment, harassment, and other bad and inhumane methods. But fighting is also waged politically, and indeed with legal coercive measures through which the human being's freedom is curtailed or robbed, as well as with military, through which state hostilities are fought out with war, with orders to kill and murder, which not only brings mass deaths and suffering, hardship and misery, but also tremendous destruction of valuable human achievements. However, that is not all, because also suffering and hardship, as well as Ausartung, lies, and serious financial and other types of cheating, murder and manslaughter and so forth through various kinds of sports, are ethically, morally unworthy to such an extent that it can be called more than just gruesome. This is because these sports are only directed towards fighting and victory, which not only leads to strife and gewalt, but also to hatred, to revenge and persecution, and even to murder and manslaughter. There is also a desire for might connected with it, and everyone wants to be bigger and better than the human being next to oneself. And this again provides a reason for harming, neglecting, and ultimately hating one's fellow human being, and so forth. As a result, psychoactivity develops in human beings that takes hold of their entire pseudo-thinking and influences it in such a wise that their brains set in motion complex chemical processes of around 90,000 million nerve cells, which further produce chemical messengers, and these in turn trigger thoughts and bring forth attitudes that demand gratification, just as the addiction of belief requires. This process can no longer be simply shut off because it is very difficult to control once it has come about, which is why it is necessary to pay attention right from the beginning to avoid the upcoming of this addictive state of a belief. This, however, is only possible if human beings maintain a clear sense and never ever give themselves over to any cause in a belief-based wise, and thus do not fall prey to the belief addiction. This works without exception in such a wise that only a pseudo-thinking is possible, which is founded in the human beings not being able to think according to reality and its truth, but only appearing to do so, which they do not perceive, however, because his or her pseudo-thoughts are not neutral, but are influenced in every case by that which dominates him or her through the belief addiction. If human beings really want to get away from the belief addiction, religious or worldly, they do not have as good a chance as human beings who have fallen prey to a substance-related addiction, because in the case of the latter, the withdrawal symptoms can be treated medically, and the addicts can, if necessary, be isolated in a clinic or privately. Unfortunately, this is not possible with religious or worldly belief addicts, because they are confronted daily with fellow human beings who are also belief addicted and who influence with their addiction those who would like to free themselves from it. Therefore, they are dependent on themselves and on making a conscious effort to create their own clear thoughts and feelings with regard to reality and its truth, and also to living according to them. In doing so, it must also be clear to them that they must retain their will of insight and their behaviour to henceforth turn only to reality and its truth. Although the belief delusion addiction is very arduous to resolve, it does not correspond to a diagnosis of an absolute life sentence, because if human beings gain ethical moral knowledge through learning, then the sense for logic, intellect, rationality, and responsibility also arises. Therethrough it results that reality is recognized, and no dear God, no angels or saints, good spirits and so forth, guide life in all situations, rather human beings on their own do, through their conscious thoughts, feelings, rational decisions, and correct actions. This basis of behavior is built up as naturally as ethics and morals, which of course already arose hundreds of millions of years ago in the first living creatures, and ensured that they were able to come together and even form families and herds and handle conflicts. The times since then have flown into the past, and through evolution, human beings have come into being, capable of conscious thought, of creating feelings, of logic, of intellect, and of rationality. However, instead of turning to natural ethics and morals from the basis and consciously learning them in all their values, they acted contrary and moved away more and more from the natural, and thus from the majority of all values of ethics and morals. Through this, they became selfish, wrong-thinking, and stored in the depths of their characters all the negativity and evil that erupts at every suitable and unsuitable opportunity and leads to murder and manslaughter, and since time immemorial even to war and destruction. Then religious belief was added, which developed into delusion and ultimately into addiction, so that the majority of Earth humanity today has fallen prey to the belief delusion addiction and has become incapable of consciously nurturing thoughts and bringing forth feelings autonomously, of taking right decisions and acting without belief delusion addictive factors being in play. The ample natural values of ethics and morals, which human beings of Earth, however, neglect and are therefore confronted with constant unfortunate challenges in life, do not develop autonomously. Rather, they have to be learned consciously and willingly. It is therefore in no wise such as the social media and the psychology sciences keep claiming that everything is perfection, because this lie and delusional leading keeps human beings from scrutinizing ethics and morals, and from getting to know that that which is publicly taught in this regard by the professionals is nothing more than smoke and mirrors. That which is very inadequately taught neither leads human beings to becoming true human beings, nor does it resolve all the evil and negative. With the conscious learning of the values of ethics and morals, human beings come to know their own strengths and values, through which they build up a healthy trust in themselves regarding how they can also use their self-acquired abilities and always remain conscious and really active and capable of acting. The bond with other human beings forms honestly and well, and the dealing with them becomes trustful and reflects that which the character really sets free in the positive, which is fundamentally brought forth by the consciousness and its thoughts and feelings in a positive wise. It is only out of the consciousness that the true state of the values of ethics and morals is formed through conscious learning, which is why this is called moral consciousness, and as a teaching of cognition, knowledge, and principle is also called moral philosophy. This is established and formed by logic, intellect, and rationality, as well as thoughts and feelings in the negative or positive, wherethrough human beings themselves determine their ethics and the moral status, which also contains aesthetics. Thus, the teaching of sensual perception, that is to say, viewing. Aesthetics moves the senses while looking at things, through which human beings callistize for them, that is to say, classify them according to their spiritual, fine sensitive feelings into something pleasant or unpleasant, into something beautiful or ugly, and so forth. However, the creation energy alone guarantees human beings that from their consciousnesses, the thoughts and feelings arising from it in logic, intellect, and rationality determine the state of their ethics and morals, and also keep them in function. However, it is human beings themselves who determine how they form these in a positive or negative wise and bring them to fruition, or can exercise and maintain them, however, again, in a positive or negative wise, through logical or illogical thoughts and feelings. However, morals and ethics, which are actually the cornerstones for human beings to be able to live together with their ilk, thus as a family, in friendship and society and so forth, are also of enormous importance in dealing with themselves, because they fundamentally determine the characters of human beings. Therefore, it is completely erroneous and wrong to assume, as the experts do assume, believe, and teach, that the ethical moral moment is to be valued only as the outward modes of behaviour, because fundamentally it determines what, who, and how human beings themselves are. The moral consciousness, that is to say, the moral philosophy that human beings cultivate and show, determines their personalities, namely who, how, and what they are. Furthermore, it indubitably also clearly shows how the consciousness of the human being in question works, and how worthy it is in terms of logic, intellect, and rationality. But now the question arises as to what morals and ethics actually mean in their inherent value, what their meaning and purpose is. Basically, the human beings live without thinking deeply about these values. Consequently, they do not understand that morals and ethics are only applied by them imaginatively, because, truly and correctly seen, they only apparently really apply these values and live according to them. In reality, and its truth, they live in the moral and ethical values only because it is quite usual to integrate and be peaceful in the family, in the circle of friends, in the community, or in connection with an organization or in society and so forth, which, however, quickly turns into the opposite when the wind changes and everything does not go according to the imaginations. Very quickly, agitation comes up, then strife, hatred, revenge and retaliation, as well as calumny, all of which is contrary to morals and ethics, the terms of which are perhaps known to some human beings, but which have neither really been worked out for their own personalities, nor have they ever been consciously applied. The rule, namely, is that peaceful coexistence in the family, among friends, in the community, in the military, and in society and so forth, only takes place because it is custom and tradition, or prescribed in simply fashion, and does not happen in conscious adherence to morals and ethics. Therefore, morality and ethics are not consciously learned and applied, but only something sanctimonious that the human beings imagine they will do when asked or when it is demanded of them. In truth, however, they have never consciously learned it and also have not taken it on from anyone that they would be conscious of it. Only then, when human beings devote themselves consciously concentrated to comprehending, learning, and permanently applying ethics and morals, will they be able, in the first place, to treat themselves and their fellow human beings, and furthermore, all living creatures, as well as the planet, nature, and the entire fauna and flora, in a right and honorable form. Thus, morals and ethics are not only important and of very great significance in enabling human beings to live together, but, which is extremely rare if it is even mentioned and explained at all, they affect human beings personally and set them apart as such, if they really cultivate the high values of ethics and morals. This is because they form them, make them conscientious and honest, and also make them true and self-thinking human beings who, true to reality and its truth alone, perceive everything and cultivate their thoughts accordingly, make the right decisions and act accordingly, and consequently also protect everything worth living for. Only the correct and healthy status of morality and ethics guarantees the human beings that peace, freedom, fairness, and equality of all human beings and a correct state can exist. Something that can also be applied to all life forms, the planet, nature, and all its ecosystems, as well as to the ample flora, to all waters, the atmosphere and the seasons, and is applicable in everything. A thought, a feeling, a decision, as well as an action are quite wrong and bad, as well as not ethical moral if they are carried out. On the one hand, if the human beings know that the execution is contrary to ethical moral duty, but also if the ethics and morals are only superficial or are not cultivated at all. The rule with the majority of humanity on Earth is that it is not conscious of true ethics and morals, because as a rule, the human beings of this majority go along with these values only superficially, flutteringly, and without content. This is because they do not know the values of ethics and morals themselves, nor do they know that ethics and morals are to be acquired and trained deliberately and intentionally. The human beings, as a rule, only habitually pay attention to the little application of the values directed towards ethics and morality, while in the depth of their character, the bad and opposite of ethics and morality lies in wait, which breaks out from them at every suitable or unsuitable opportunity. This is the evil, and may this be explained again and again, that lies in wait in the depths of the character because it has been registered by the human beings through upbringing and through the influences of fellow human beings and the environment, and has been deposited, unprocessed, uncontrolled, and not neutralized. And this is as unvalues continuously lying in wait, which on this and that occasion immediately break out and release that which the human beings do not have under control in terms of character and allow to break out. As far as the term morality is concerned, it is borrowed from the Latin word moris, Latin for custom, usage. Accordingly, morality means that the human beings should adhere to customs and traditions and thus integrate to the moral behavior and consequently not behave immorally, thus therefore behave in a form that is required by the defined norms and rules of decency and behavior, and consequently of the corresponding behavior of one human being to another. So if human beings act immorally because they give free rein to their deep, negative character traits, then they become angry and simply hit out when something goes against the grain, or they commit senseless gavolt against themselves, rage thoughtlessly and senselessly against fellow human beings. However, it is also the case that they develop hatred, feelings of guilt or depression, or simply withdraw, just as they, on the other hand, often commit acts of gavolt because they cannot solve ethical moral conflicts and simply go crazy, namely because they have never consciously learned the very extensive values of ethics and morals. As a rule, however, this leads sooner or later to negative and quite evil Ausartung of the character and to uncontrollable behavioral Ausartung, which very often ends in suicide or as another evil consequence in murder and manslaughter. However, this would never happen if the human beings would consciously learn ethics and morality in all their values, and indeed in their comprehensiveness, namely as they actually occur in nature and make the human beings true human beings, if they consciously and comprehensively learn all the high values of ethics and morality, hold them within themselves for the whole time of their lives, and apply them. If the human beings are truly consciously educated in ethics and morals, then they will never sell their own grandmother. Consequently, they will never enter into enmities and never advocate or wage death penalties and wars, for which they will never provide any help or take part in such. Therefore, it is also the case that the majority of earthly humanity cannot function as a peaceful society, because the lack of ethics and morals among the majority of human beings of Earth is not only catastrophic but so unworthy and insignificant that even children, even at the youngest age, tend to murder and manslaughter and even consciencelessly and wildly entice their ilk to murder, be it out of hatred, wantonness, fun, or for other, and in any case always depraved reasons that can never ever be justified ethically, morally, or otherwise. As the first important pillar for ethical moral development, a caring as well as very heedful and close bond, as well as the ethical moral behaviour of the parents towards the child is necessary and imperative, namely from the earliest youth at birth. This not only teaches and promotes the child's willingness to cooperate, rather the whole thing also has a very great influence on the necessary bond regarding the child and the parents, which fundamentally leads to the growing child feeling safe, protected, and loved. This forms the actual root of the becoming of the ethics and morals of the new human being, in which case this is therefore already at the beginning of life, and the becoming and understanding of ethics and morals not only begins, as psychology falsely claims, when logic, intellect, and rationality only begin in later years, whereby this is erroneously assumed to be only at the age of 8 to 11. The conscious and willing learning of the entirety of all these values of ethics and morality and their daily and lasting implementation is what makes human beings the true human beings that they should be by nature. However, these values are much more comprehensive than those known to psychological science and go far beyond that which it calls ethics and morals. Fundamentally, the few values are practically no more than that which is generally called a drop in the ocean, because the whole encompasses very much more, because it includes everything that makes human beings what they naturally should be, namely true human beings. To become this, however, requires consciously learning what ethics and morality include and logically following it in daily life. It also means that everything negative, wrong, and unright, and so forth, must be strictly dissolved and neutralized, so that it cannot become deeply fixed in the character as an evil and bad characteristic and break out at every suitable or unsuitable opportunity. This is especially the case through some kind of agitation and so forth, where through the unprocessed and unneutralized unvalues, which have been deposited deep in the character, break through to the outside and cause terribleness. This happens in the form of lies and deception, as well as hatred, anger, revenge, calumny, but also as retaliation, gavolt and delusion, as war, suicide, murder and manslaughter, and destruction and so forth. All the unprocessed values which are ethically, morally unacceptable and are to be consciously fought against by the human beings, but which are to be neutralized by a willing learning of the ample values, are inevitably deposited deep in the character if they are not heeded, from which they come up again, and the human beings out themselves negatively with them if they get agitated for any reason. As you can see, The basic understanding and development of ethics and morals is essential for harmonious coexistence in a society. Find out more about this in the free booklet, The Values of Ethics and Morals, written by Billy Edward Albert Meier. Subscribe to our channel for more interesting topics and hit the bell if you want to be informed about our latest publications. Until our next episode, when we'll be once again revealing lots of interesting facts, what school won't tell you.